They offered him everything: wealth, power, safety, and he turned it all down. 46 BC, in the city of Utica in North Africa. Julius Caesar has basically won the Roman Civil War. His armies are unstoppable. His victory is complete. And now he sends a message to one last guy standing in his way. That guy is Cato. Caesar's message isn't a threat. It's actually pretty generous. He's offering Cato a full pardon, forgiveness, money, a nice, comfortable life going forward. All Cato has to do is accept Caesar as the boss. Just bow his head once. That's it. Cato reads the letter, puts it down, and spends his last evening doing the last thing you'd expect. He takes a bath. He has dinner with his friends. He laughs with them. They talk philosophy. He sits down and reads Plato's dialogue on the immortality of the soul. Not once, but twice. Then, quietly, by himself, in the dark, Cato makes his choice. He's not going to bend. Not for Caesar. Not for his own survival. Not for anything. What kind of man chooses death over compromise? What values are actually worth dying for? And what the hell can a Roman senator who died over 2,000 years ago teach us today about real integrity? About standing your ground when the whole world wants you to kneel? Stick with me for the next 20 minutes, because Cato's story isn't just some dusty history lesson. It's a mirror, and it's staring right at every single one of us. To understand why Cato's death shocked the ancient world, and still echoes today, you first need to understand who he was and where he came from. Marcus Porcius Cato, known as Cato the Younger, was born in 95 BC into one of Rome's most respected families. His great-grandfather, Cato the Elder, was already a legend, a man famous for austerity, discipline, and an almost terrifying moral intensity. Young Cato inherited every bit of it. From childhood, Cato was different. He didn't want toys. He asked questions that made adults uncomfortable. His tutor once noted that Cato was nearly impossible to convince through affection or punishment, but respond perfectly to reason. If you explained why something was right, Cato would do it with absolute commitment. If you couldn't explain why, Cato simply wouldn't move. As a young man in Rome, a city drowning in corruption, bribery, and political games, Cato became something almost mythological, a politician who genuinely could not be bought. In a Senate where votes were purchased like market goods, Cato's vote was simply not for sale. Everyone knew it. Even his enemies respected it. He lived like an ordinary citizen. He wore simple clothing when Roman aristocrats wore silk. He walked barefoot in summer. He drank cheap wine when fine wine flowed freely at every banquet he attended. Not as performance, not as politics, simply because he believed luxury softened the soul, and a softened soul makes compromised choices. He was the Stoic in practice, not the philosopher who talks about virtue in a garden, but the man who exercised virtue under fire, in the Senate, on the battlefield, in the face of Julius Caesar himself. Rome had seen many powerful men. It had never quite seen a man like Cato. The rivalry between Cato and Julius Caesar is one of the most extraordinary personal conflicts in all of human history. Not because of military battles, though those came, but because it was a war of two completely opposite visions of what Rome should be, what power should be, what a man should be. Caesar was brilliant, magnetic, and completely pragmatic about morality. He believed that great men make their own rules, that the strong deserve to lead, that ends justify means. He was arguably the most talented human being of his era, and he knew it. He used that talent with absolute breathtaking confidence. Cato was Caesar's opposite in almost every way. Where Caesar was flexible, Cato was rigid. Where Caesar charmed, Cato confronted. Where Caesar bent rules elegantly, Cato refused to bend at all, ever, under any circumstance, at any cost.
Their clashes in the Senate were legendary. When Caesar made a brilliant political move, Cato would stand and speak for hours, literally filibustering to prevent it. Caesar once had Cato physically removed from the Senate chamber and arrested. Cato walked back in the moment he was released. When Caesar proposed generous terms for a group of conspirators, Cato argued for the death penalty so ferociously that the Senate reversed its decision on the spot. Caesar reportedly said that of all his enemies, Cato alone he could neither bribe, charm, nor reason into compliance. And here is the devastating irony that history records. Caesar admired Cato, genuinely. He wrote about him. He preserved Cato's memory, even while opposing everything Cato stood for. Because Caesar understood, perhaps better than anyone, that Cato represented something Caesar himself could never fully possess: absolute, unconditional integrity, a soul that simply could not be purchased. To understand Cato's refusal to bend, you need to understand the philosophy that ran through him like iron rods through concrete: Stoicism. Not as a set of interesting ideas, but as a lived, physical, daily discipline that shaped every decision he ever made. The Stoics believed in one non-negotiable principle: virtue is the only true good. Everything else, wealth, status, physical comfort, even life itself, belongs to the category of preferred indifference. Nice to have, not essential, not worth compromising your soul for. Cato didn't just read this, he lived it with a literalness that bordered on the extreme. He once walked miles barefoot through scorching African desert heat, leading his army, to prove that a commander who demands hardship from his soldiers must be willing to suffer it himself. His men worshipped him for it. He trained himself to feel pain without complaint. He practiced going without food to master hunger. He slept on hard ground by choice, not masochism, discipline. He was building a self that external circumstances could not touch. Because here is the Stoic insight that Cato understood completely. If you need something from the outside world to be okay, then whoever controls that thing controls you. Caesar could offer Cato comfort, wealth, and survival, because those things can be given and taken. But Cato had decided long ago that he needed none of them. His soul was his alone. And a soul that needs nothing from tyrants cannot be controlled by tyrants. This is the foundation of everything Cato did. His stubbornness wasn't stubbornness. It was the natural behavior of a man who had already decided, years before the crisis arrived, exactly what he was willing to die for. When the moment came, he didn't have to think. He already knew. Here's what most people miss when they study Cato. He wasn't just being stubborn. He wasn't just being principled for the sake of it. He was fighting for something specific and enormous: the Roman Republic itself. And he understood, perhaps more clearly than anyone alive, exactly what was at stake. The Roman Republic was built on a radical idea for its time: that no single man should hold absolute power, that power should be divided, balanced, and always accountable to law. It was imperfect, deeply imperfect, built on slavery and conquest, but its core principle, that the law stands above the man, was revolutionary. And Cato loved it with his entire being. For decades, Cato had watched the Republic erode. First Sulla had marched on Rome. Then the first triumvirate, Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus, had carved up political power between three men in an arrangement that made a mockery of republican institutions. And then Caesar crossed the Rubicon with his army, an act that was, by Roman law, an act of war against the state itself. To accept Caesar's pardon would be to accept that one man could tear down 500 years of republican government, seize absolute power, and then simply offer forgiveness to those who resisted. It would be to say, yes, this is legitimate. Yes, we accept this. Yes, one man's will is now more important than the law. Cato could not say that, not because he was suicidal, but because he understood that the moment he accepted Caesar's pardon, he would be the most powerful endorsement Caesar could possibly have. If even Cato, Rome's conscience, bowed his head, then the Republic was truly finished. His defiance, his death, was his final act of service to the idea he loved more than his own life.
This is the part of the story that separates Cato from every other historical figure who died for their principles. It's not the death itself, it's how he spent the hours before it. The night of his death, Cato did not rage, he did not weep, he did not deliver thunderous speeches or write dramatic final letters. He had a dinner party. He invited his friends, he asked them philosophical questions about Stoicism, whether the wise man alone is truly free. He argued good-naturedly. He laughed. When one of his guests seemed sad, Cato noticed it and gently changed the subject to spare him pain. After dinner, he walked on the beach, alone, in the dark, looking at the stars. Then he came back in, read Plato's Phaedo, the dialogue where Socrates discusses the soul's immortality on the night before his death, and read it twice.
Not for comfort, for understanding. His friends had secretly removed his sword, hoping to buy time. When Cato noticed, he didn't shout. He calmly asked them to return it. They did, weeping. He thanked them. He told his son, "It would be a dishonor to you if you lived in freedom only through Caesar's mercy, but I cannot survive the death of my country's freedom." And then he went to sleep. When he woke during the night, he made his final choice, quietly, without drama, exactly the way he had lived. The historian Plutarch wrote that when Caesar received news of Cato's death, he said, "Cato, I grudge you your death, for you grudged me the honor of saving your life." Even in death, Cato won.
Here is one of history's most astonishing ironies. Cato caused Caesar more trouble dead than alive. And Caesar knew it, and there was absolutely nothing he could do about it. Within months of Cato's death, something extraordinary happened. The entire Roman world, even people who had opposed Cato, even people who had laughed at his rigid principles, began to mourn him. Poets wrote about him, philosophers praised him. His death became a symbol, a rallying point, a proof that there had existed in Rome at least one man that Caesar's power could not touch. Caesar was so disturbed by this that he personally wrote a document called Anti-Cato, a 2-volume political attack on Cato's reputation. Think about that. The most powerful man in the world, master of Rome, conqueror of Gaul and Egypt, spending his time writing attack pieces against a dead man. Because the dead man was winning. Cicero wrote a eulogy for Cato that made Romans weep in the streets. Brutus wrote another.
Cato's image was everywhere. He had become not just a man, but an idea. The idea that power has limits, that there are things a free man will not do, regardless of consequence, that integrity, when taken to its ultimate conclusion, defeats even the sword. This is why Cato matters 2,000 years later. Not because he prevented Caesar's rise, he didn't. Not because the Republic was saved, it wasn't.
but because he proved something that tyrants and opportunists throughout all of history have desperately needed people to believe was impossible, that a man can exist who truly will not bend. That proof has inspired revolutionaries, philosophers, and freedom fighters for 20 centuries. George Washington kept a play about Cato in his personal collection and had it performed for his troops at Valley Forge. When everything seemed lost, he wanted his soldiers to remember Cato. Let's bring this into your world, because Cato's story isn't just ancient history, it's a template, a blueprint for how an individual with values survives in a world that constantly pressures those values to disappear. We don't face Julius Caesar, but every single day, we face smaller versions of the same test. The boss who asks you to sign off on something you know is wrong. The friend group that pressures you to laugh at something that isn't funny. The culture that tells you to be quiet, go along, take the money, don't make waves, just survive. These are not dramatic moments. They rarely feel like defining choices, but they are. Every time you compromise a value to avoid discomfort, you take one small step toward becoming someone you wouldn't recognize. And every time you hold your line, quietly, without performance, simply because you know what's right, you take one step toward becoming the kind of person Cato was.
Cato's secret wasn't willpower. It wasn't stubbornness. It was pre-decision. He had decided, long before any crisis arrived, exactly where his lines were, exactly what he would and wouldn't do. So when the crisis came, when Caesar's offer landed on the table, Cato didn't need to deliberate. The decision had already been made, years ago, in the quiet moments when no one was watching. This is the most practical thing you can take from Cato's entire life. Decide now, before the pressure comes, what you will not compromise. Write it down if you have to. Know your values so clearly that when someone tries to buy them or threaten them, you already know the answer. Because the man who hasn't decided his values in advance will always find a reason to bend. And the man who has decided, really decided, will always find the strength to stand.
Most people have never heard of Cato, yet his fingerprints are on almost every major institution of freedom in the Western world. His story has been quietly shaping history for 2,000 years. The Stoic philosophers who came after him, Seneca, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, all held Cato up as the supreme example of the Stoic ideal made flesh. When Seneca wanted to illustrate true freedom, he talked about Cato. When Marcus Aurelius needed a model of virtue under pressure, he turned to Cato. During the Renaissance, Cato was rediscovered by humanist scholars who were trying to imagine what a truly free republic could look like. He became an icon of civic virtue. His story fed directly into the political philosophy that would eventually produce constitutional democracy.
In 1713, the English writer Joseph Addison wrote a play called simply Cato, and it became the most popular political play of the 18th century. It wasn't just entertainment, it was a manifesto. The play's themes of liberty, republican virtue, and resistance to tyranny were read as direct commentary on contemporary politics. It was radical, it was dangerous, and it was everywhere. When the American founding fathers were building a new nation, literally trying to create a republic from scratch, they turned to Cato. George Washington, as I mentioned, had the play performed for his freezing, starving troops at Valley Forge. Patrick Henry's famous line, "Give me liberty or give me death," is a direct echo of Cato's own choice. Benjamin Franklin wrote under the pen name Silence Dogood, a character from the Cato play. The American Republic
with its separation of powers, its checks and balances, its deep suspicion of concentrated power, bears the intellectual fingerprints of a Roman senator who died in 46 BC rather than kneel to a dictator. Cato lost every battle. He won history. We have traveled 2,000 years together in the last 20 minutes, from the corridors of the Roman Senate to a beach in North Africa on the last night of Cato's life, from the clash of two civilizations to the most intimate question a human being can ask themselves. And now we arrive at the only question that actually matters. Not a historical question, not a philosophical one, a personal one. What will you not compromise? Because that question is the question Cato answered with his life. And the way you answer it, not in words, but in choices, in small daily decisions, in moments when it would be easier to go along. That answer defines you more completely than anything else. Cato didn't have an easy life. He wasn't celebrated while he lived. He was mocked, opposed, arrested, and defeated politically at almost every turn. The republic he loved died anyway. His sacrifices didn't prevent the thing he feared most.
And yet, he remains one of the most discussed, most admired, most studied figures from all of ancient history. Not because he won, but because he was true. Because in a world full of men who bent when the pressure came, Cato stood, quietly, without drama, simply because he had decided that some things matter more than survival. There is a version of your life where you make every pragmatic choice, where you go along, where you take the money, avoid the conflict, keep the peace, and arrive at the end of your years safe and comfortable and having offended no one. And there is a version of your life where you decide, right now, today, what you actually stand for. And then you stand for it, regardless of cost, regardless of outcome. Cato chose the second path. He paid for it with everything. And 2,000 years later, we're still talking about him. The people who took Caesar's offer, history doesn't remember their names. If this story moved something in you, if Cato's choice made you think about your own, then do one thing right now. Hit subscribe. Because every week we bring you stories like this one. Stories of men and women who faced impossible choices and chose the harder, truer path. As Cato himself believed, I would rather be defeated standing for the right thing than be victorious standing for nothing. That is what we stand for here. See you in the next one.